So coming up this weekend is going to be UFC 308 headlined by Ilia Topuria taking on Max Holloway for the featherweight title. And in the co-main event we have Robert Whittaker fighting Khamzat Chimaev in a 5-round co-main event. I do feel a lot better about this card than I did that UFC Vegas card. And I am coming off a pretty bad week. My PFL predictions were probably the worst I've ever done on a PFL card, and then my UFC predictions weren't too good, but a lot of big favourites on that UFC card didn't win, but in hindsight, I probably should have seen at least one of them coming, but it is what it is. UFC 308 I do feel much better about. Now, although I did pretty poorly, Angelo and Jacob at We Want Picks did do quite well, and of course you can get a 3-day free trial to the We Want Picks premium membership if you do sign up using my code ARTEM. I haven't got an updated overlay yet for that, but that's kind of what everything you can get on that website. Let me know what you do think of this new overlay. Is it a bit much? I know that the yellow could kind of contrast a lot with the white topology background, and I did have a white one previously, so I don't know. Let me know what you think. I did just decide to make a change. I did get absolutely screwed last week as well by YouTube. They actually took down my Contender Series Week 10 video. I don't know why. I appealed it and they still removed it anyway, so if you can't find that video, I didn't delete it. I did pretty good on the card. I picked 3 underdogs correctly and YouTube removed the video, so it is what it is. We move on. Now let's get into my predictions for UFC 308. The first fight on the topology order is Kennedy Nzechukwu now fighting against Chris Barnett. I believe this is a short notice matchup because Chris Barnett was meant to fight against Junior Tuffa. That would have been a fun fight, but he pulled out due to the hurricane in Florida. And Kennedy Nzechukwu was meant to fight somebody else. He was meant to fight Justin Tuffa. So now we've got Chris Barnett taking on Nzechukwu. Nzechukwu now, of course, moving up to heavyweight. In general, it could be a good idea. I do think if he was to take on a power puncher at this weight class, it could go pretty poorly, as we have seen Nzechukwu fade quite a bit in the past and get knocked out. But I do think that he should have the skills to be able to defeat Chris Barnett here. He's going to look a lot bigger. He is 6'5", and he was a massive light heavyweight as well. Chris Barnett, of course, is a lot of fun at 5'9". He's a big boy. A very big boy, but he's very athletic. I believe he's got that black belt in Taekwondo, and he does throw a lot of spinning kicks, and he does want to strike on the feet. This guy is a lot of fun, but he does take on Nzechukwu, who I do think is just going to be a little bit more skilled, should be able to fight from range because that is what he likes to do. Nzechukwu does struggle against guys that want to close the distance, which Chris Barnett is going to need to do to land any strikes, but I do think that Nzechukwu can keep the fight on the feet, where I think the fight is going to take place and just win a decision. I don't really see Nzechukwu finishing Barnett, even though we have seen Barnett get finished in the past from gassing out. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of happens there. I think Nzechukwu is a massive favourite. I don't feel that confident in him, I'll be honest with you, but I do think that he does get it done, even though he has lost a couple of fights recently and is now moving to a new weight class. Said Nurmagomedov now takes on Daniel Santos. I think this is a massive step up in competition for Santos, and I would also argue that it's a step down in competition for Said Nurmagomedov. Said Nurmagomedov did, of course, fight against Jonathan Martinez, and in this fight, hot take, I did think that Said Nurmagomedov won the fight, but it is what it is. I do seem to disagree with judges a lot these days, but anyway, Said Nurmagomedov is, of course, a member of the Nurmagomedov family. I don't think he is actually related directly to Khabib Nurmagomedov, but he is a striker for the most part. He does have very good kicks, he does have very good wrestling, and it was actually in that fight against Martinez he was mostly able to get that wrestling going. He has been able to showcase recently that he can pull guillotine if you do shoot lazy takedowns on him. Of course, he did guillotine Muin Gafarov, he guillotined Said Yakub Kakramanov, and he also guillotined Cody Stamann, I believe, on the opening fight of that UFC 270 card in 47 seconds. I don't necessarily think that in this matchup he's going to really need to defend takedowns, because although Daniel Santos is a shooter box guy, and we know that shooter box guys all fight the exact same way, they're literally just mini Charles Oliveira's, and if Charles Oliveira is in Daniel Santos' corner, he probably is going to have superpowers. But Daniel Santos, very aggressive Muay Thai style that we love shooter box fighters for. very aggressive in the grappling if the fight does get to that point. But I do think in this matchup, he is going to take on a guy that I actually think can be better than him everywhere. I do think that Said Nurmagomedov can wrestle if he needs to. I also think that he can outstrike Daniel Santos. It's not like we haven't seen Daniel Santos beaten on the feet before by lesser strikers like John Castaneda, was giving Daniel Santos a lot of problems before Santos really started to get the shooter box style going in the second round and get the finish. He did come back against Johnny Munoz Jr., was able to beat Johnny Munoz Jr., but Munoz Jr. is just a very one-dimensional grappler. In this fight, I do like Said Nurmagomedov. It is a hometown fight for him as well, and I do believe that he can defeat Daniel Santos in this matchup by decision, and that is my pick for that fight. Now we have Bruno Silva fighting the returning Ismail Naurdiev. If you guys are unfamiliar with Naurdiev, he is actually a former UFC fighter that has now been re-signed to the promotion to fight against Bruno Silva, and an interesting re-signing, I would say, because he is 1-2 in his last 3 fights, but I don't know if it really matters, because he's a lot of fun to watch. Now, he was in the UFC quite a while ago, and he was fighting at 170 pounds. He hasn't really had the best post-UFC run. He has fought for Brave for the most part, and he has lost to a couple of notable names. Jarrah Hussein El Salawi is now fighting for the PFL, but he's had a pretty terrible run as of recently himself, not really a well-aging win. And then Vadim Kutsi, if you guys don't know, was on the Contender Series and just looked terrible against Daniel Franza. Absolutely terrible in that fight. However, in that matchup against Vadim Kutsi, before he did eventually get knocked out by a massive overhand right, Naurdiev was beating up Kutsi pretty badly. He was landing a lot of leg kicks on Kutsi, and Kutsi kind of looked like he was getting ready to give up, and he just, out of nowhere, did knock out Ismail Naurdiev there. So that's one of those losses, and then he got a quick win over a 14-8 opponent. Now, when I first saw this fight actually made, I thought that this was the UFC signing Naurdiev to give Bruno Silva a pretty favourable opponent, but it seems like the odds makers don't necessarily fully agree. Bruno Silva recently has just been fighting absolutely everybody that nobody else wants to fight. He has been on a pretty bad run as of recently, but if you do look into it, he fought Alex Pereira on Alex Pereira's come up, and then he did lose to the legendary GM3. Ignore that. He fought Brendan Allen, Sharaputin Magomedov, and then got eye-poked to oblivion by Chris Weidman. And is what it is. In this fight, he's taking on another striker. I would be surprised if Naurdiev is going to go out there and wrestle Bruno Silva. And in a striking fight, although Bruno Silva is not a technical striker, he does still hit pretty hard. He can get pretty scrappy, and he does hit pretty hard. He's got, I believe, 19 wins by knockout. Most of his losses have come by submission. He's not going to be fighting against a grappler in this fight. It's going to be a striking matchup, and I do like Bruno Silva in this one here. I think that it is a step down in competition for Bruno Silva from the guys that he has been fighting recently, and I do believe that he can defeat Ismail Naurdiev in Naurdiev's return to the UFC. So I'm going to go with Silva, and I'm going to pick Silva by knockout. I do think someone's getting finished here on either side. I think it's going to be scrappy. I think it's going to be fun, and Naurdiev's fights are always fun. That's why he's back in the UFC. Now we have Farid Basharat fighting against Victor Hugo. I think that this is a good matchup for Farid Basharat. We did just see Victor Hugo make his UFC debut after a very impressive Dana White's Contender Series opponent appearance against Eduardo Torres. He fought against the short notice replacement Falcao, and in that matchup, Pedro Falcao attempted 13 takedowns against Victor Hugo and only ever got one of those takedowns officially, whereas Victor Hugo was able to defend most of them and was able to win the fight on the feet. Now, I did think that it was kind of an odd fight because I, despite his nickname, do consider Victor Hugo to be a grappler. But he did showcase decent striking in that matchup. But Pedro Falcao, even though he did take the fight on short notice, I thought that he did look a little bit better than I expected him to. And I do think now Victor Hugo was taking on a very similar stylistic matchup to who he fought in his UFC debut, except just the next level above. Farid Basharat I think is going to be able to get more than 8% of the takedowns that he attempts. And he is still a threat on the feet as well. Farid Basharat does still have some pretty good boxing skill sets, and as well as that, he does have very good wrestling and top control. He was able to just defeat Taylor Lapoulis, and that's a good win because Taylor Lapoulis is just a very good defensive wrestler with very good takedown defense and on the feet. Although he's not really that high volume, he still does have enough skills to give a lot of people problems in the bantamweight division. Farid Basharat, of course, is Javid Basharat's brother. He also got into the UFC off a win on the Contender Series against Alan Bagoso, who has now started to make something of himself in MMA, and especially as a coach. Alan Bagoso is now coaching quite a few fighters too, which is quite cool. I do think that in this matchup, Basharat should be able to get the takedowns against Hugo, but Hugo is always going to be dangerous. This guy does have 29 professional fights. A lot of his wins do come by submission and knockout and early. But if you do look through it as well, he has fought good competition, even though when I was doing his tape study to fight against Eduardo Torres, I was really struggling to find tape on him. He does have a lot of good wins. He does have a very aggressive style. He throws a lot of kicks, but I do think in general, Basharat should be able to get the takedowns. And although we haven't really seen Basharat get a finish so far in the UFC, I think he is still going to do enough damage against Victor Hugo, even if he is on top position, to win the fight. So I'm going to pick Farid Basharat to win by decision in this matchup, and I do have relative confidence in him. Now we have Myktybek Oralbai fighting against Mateusz Rebecki. This is an interesting one because I was really high on Mateusz Rebecki. Now I know that we had always seen, and hindsight's always 2020, we had always seen problems in Rebecki's game, and I think the biggest red flag for Rebecki was his win in his debut against Nick Fiore, where not only could he not finish Nick Fiore, he gassed out in that fight badly, and Nick Fiore just got smoked by Chase Hooper. So in hindsight, you know, we kind of had seen the writing on the wall, and Diego Ferreira was able to really kind of expose a lot of weaknesses in Rebecki's game, and that is particularly the cardio. Rebecki is just a very aggressive guy. This guy always runs forward, throwing a lot of punches, and he just kind of is a very aggressive fighter, attempting takedowns, throwing punches and bunches as he moves forward, and he does have pretty good kicks as well. He's a pretty small guy for the weight class, standing at 5'7", but it's not really a bad thing for him because it does mean that he can get in pretty low pretty quickly on his takedowns. He did lose in his most recent matchup to Diego Ferreira, and it was a very sad sight to see because it really was kind of the unraveling of the Rebecki hype train. We cannot ignore the fact that he knocked out Lok Radzhabov in that second round, and that was a very good performance. And then he did finish Roosevelt Roberts in the first round, who recently come back again on short notice, and I believe gave someone problems. It was a very similar opponent, Ludovic Klein some problems. So yeah, I mean, Rebecki's had a couple good wins, but now we're just kind of seeing that he can melt under pressure, and the cardio is an issue. The cardio has always been an issue ever since we really kind of saw it showcased in the Nick Fiore fight, and now he does take on Myktybek Oralbai, who has come into the UFC on short notice, upper weight class at 170 pounds, had a very impressive UFC debut against Uroš Medic, where he got a submission, come back down to 155 and took on the dangerous shooter box prospect Elvis Brenner, and was able to win that fight by decision. We've really been able to see Myktybek Oralbai really able to mix in everything. He can strike, he can wrestle. On the regional scene, he was fighting for the LFA, and he took on a couple of good guys. I'm trying to look for it. Jalen Fuller. Jalen Fuller's now kind of put on a couple of good wins in his own right, and Jalen Fuller's a very tall guy, a very difficult guy to out-wrestle, and Oralbai was able to do that. He does now take on a short guy in Rebecki, and I think in the first round, I think that Oralbai probably will struggle to get the wrestling going against Rebecki, but I think if the first round does come to a close, Rebecki's going to gas. And I think that's when we're going to see Oralbai really start to take over. We know that Rebecki now doesn't have good cardio. If he doesn't get a finish in the first or the start of the second round, I do believe in Oralbai's cardio, and I think that he's going to be able to take over as the fight goes on. I do think that the fight goes to distance, and I think that Myktybek Oralbai is going to win the fight by decision, specifically by winning the second and the third round. I think there's a good chance that Rebecki wins the first round, but I think that he's going to gas. We've seen him gas, we've seen him crumble, and I think that Oralbai is going to be able to take over as the fight goes on. And now we have Ibo Aslan taking on the debuting Raffael Cerquira. Raffael Cerquira is an interesting fighter. He was meant to be on the Contender Series, but they just couldn't really find an opponent for him, as I guess what I picked up from it. He was originally meant to fight the Kyrgyzstani Uron Satibaldiev. He pulled out, and then he was going to fight Grabowski. He pulled out, and then he was going to fight Mazeo. And I think they just decided, you know what, we're not going to do this. We're just going to sign Raffael Cerquira straight up to fight in the UFC. And that's what they've done. Raffael Cerquira, as I said, he's an interesting fighter. He's 11-0. His opponents haven't really been the best so far, but he has been finishing them all by first round finish. I did struggle a little bit to find tape on him. There is a very easy to find highlight video, and then there is just a couple of fights that people have re-uploaded from somewhere else. This fight here against Avil Nilsson Diaz, you can watch, and he wins that fight by spinning elbow, which is pretty fun. The highlight video as well that we have seen has showcased quite a bit of grappling, and it does seem like Cerquira does have grappling in the back pocket, but it looks like he does mostly like to strike. Now, one thing about Cerquira is he has been fighting at heavyweight recently, so I'm interested to see how he's going to look at 205 pounds, because this guy is massive. Like, he's huge, and he's 6'4", of course, but he's not just any kind of 6'4". He's not like a thin 6'4" like we have seen out of a lot of guys. This guy is huge, so it'll be interesting to see if he can make 205 pounds super fine, super safely. To actually talk about his fighting style, though, he really is mostly a striker from what I was able to see, even though I did say it looks like he's got pretty good grappling. He fights with a lot of kicks, and his hands are very low. Like, this guy keeps his hands below his waist, and he just throws kicks, and a lot of kicks to the body. He has a couple of finishes, actually 2 body kicks. He actually was able to really hurt his opponent here, Ilvilson Diaz, with those kicks to the legs and to the body before landing the spinning back kick. But I do think in this matchup now, he's taking on a guy that I think is going to put him under a lot of pressure and is going to put him in a lot of bad positions. Now, Ibo Aslan, I was really unimpressed by him on the Contender Series. He did pick fight against Paulo Renato Jr., and although I did pick him to beat Paulo Renato Jr. just isn't that good. And then he did actually rematch the legend, the UFC legend himself, Anton Turkalj, who actually had beaten him in 2020. And in that fight against Turkalj really exposed the grappling. And I actually picked Turkalj to beat him in that fight, because I thought, you know, if Turkalj can go out there and get the takedowns, we've seen him before beat Ibo Aslan in that way. And Turkalj, I believe, went 0 for 6 on takedowns in that fight and just kind of got beaten up on the feet, and Aslan ended up getting the finish by knockout in the 3rd round. Now he's taken on Raffael Cerquira, and I actually do think that Aslan can go out there and land the big shots. The way that Aslan fights is he just comes forward and is super aggressive, and he just comes forward and lands massive shots. You know, you saw it against Paulo Renato Jr. He was very tentative to start the fight, and then he just started to go crazy, I guess you could say. I remember live streaming that fight, and someone in my chat was like, when's he gonna go crazy? And then all of a sudden, he just runs forward and throws a combo and knocks out Renato Jr. Raffael Cerquira is kind of just used to letting his opponents just letting him dictate the range, fight from him from range, because they're just not really that good. And I think Ibo Aslan is going to pressure forward and come forward and just throw huge shots. And I think he's going to put Cerquira in some pretty tough positions on the feet, where Cerquira might go out there and try to wrestle. So hopefully Ibo Aslan's takedown defense is as good as it looked against Turkalj, against other opponents like Cerquira, because I am going to pick Ibo Aslan in this one here. I'm going to pick Ibo Aslan to win by knockout in the 1st or the 2nd round. Cerquira just fights with his hands so low. Like, his hands are not here. They're not here. They are below his waist. And I think that Ibo Aslan can just kind of catch him by coming forward and landing something and catching Cerquira in a bad position with no defense. I'm going to pick Ibo Aslan. I'm going to pick him to win by knockout in this matchup. And now we can move up to Abus Magomedov fighting against Bruno Ferreira. This is where it gets interesting, because Abus Magomedov is minus 150, and yet Tapology is 25% picking him. There's the thing about Abus Magomedov and me. I don't think he's bad. In fact, I actually think that he's quite good. I think he's shown a very good skill set so far in the UFC. The problem is, he just has no cardio, like, at all. You saw him when he fought against Sean Strickland. He looked really good in the first 4 minutes of the fight, and then he gassed out and Strickland was able to finish him. And then he took on Caio Borralho, and Caio Borralho just out-wrestled him, just beat him up the whole time, to be fair. But this guy has had a very mixed run in the UFC. He did fight for the PFL prior to getting signed for the UFC, even fought for KSW. But did he fight for the PFL? Yes, he did. He went 3-1 in the PFL, and then he fought for KSW. Knocked out Stoltzfus in 19 seconds. Everyone thought that he was the second coming of Jesus Christ, and then he fought against Sean Strickland in a main event as well. They were really trying to get this guy out there, and he did, of course, end up losing. But now he's taking on Bruno Ferreira, who has had a very interesting run in the UFC, because when you look at Bruno Ferreira, you do think, man, like, this guy, he doesn't really have amazing technique, he doesn't really have amazing cardio, but he does have, just in general, a very well-rounded skill set. This guy does have a lot of power. He's a pretty short guy for the weight class, but he does pack a lot of power in his punch. He does have decent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he does have a judo background as well as the striking that we do mostly see. Most of his wins have come in the first round, and most of them have come very impressively. He knocked out Leon Aliou on the Contender Series, who kind of just never really become anything, unfortunately for Aliou on the Cage Warriors scene. And then I picked him against Gregory Rodriguez. He was a massive underdog in that fight. And then I picked him to lose against Ruziboev. So far, my picks on Bruno Ferreira have been pretty good. But now he takes on Abus Magomedov, and it really is a similar matchup to fighting against Nursultan Ruziboev. And I know that Abus Magomedov, he's got no cardio. He's untrustworthy. Why is he the favourite? I actually don't know, but I am going to pick Abus Magomedov in this matchup. I like his skill set against Bruno Ferreira. Bruno Ferreira really is just a guy that is going to need to close the distance here. He really does just kind of land big hooks and big shots in the clinch. Abus Magomedov is a skilled enough fighter to be able to control the range in the fight. And although he did, it was Wily Alves, in that fight he did show that he can maintain range, he can throw kicks up the middle, he can throw those push kicks, those tip kicks to keep his range and land his straight shots, and he can do it for 3 rounds. So hopefully Abus Magomedov can last at least a couple of rounds. And we know that if Bruno Ferreira gets into the 3rd round, he's probably going to slow down as well, because so far this guy's just knocking everybody out in the 1st round. I don't think he knocks out Abus Magomedov out in the 1st round. And although both of these guys have bad cardio, I trust the skill set of Abus Magomedov more, and I think that he is going to be able to be the one that can control the pace on the feet, control the distance on the feet. I think that's going to be the most important part. And if he needs to, he should be able to defend the takedowns against Bruno Ferreira, because if he can't, he is going to be in trouble. But I am going to pick Abus Magomedov in this matchup and to win by decision. I think he can control the pace. I think he can land a lot of shots to the body, and I think he can take over as the fight does go on. Now we move up to the featured prelim of the night. Geoff Neal fighting against Raffael dos Anjos. I was very surprised when I did initially see the odds for this matchup, because Geoff Neal is a pretty sizable favourite against a guy that is potentially going to give him some problems in this matchup, just because stylistically Raffael dos Anjos is going to look to grapple, whereas Geoff Neal is going to want to strike. Geoff Neal, one of the better boxers in this weight class. A lot of people were regarding him as the best boxer at 170 pounds for a very long time, and I thought that he had a very good performance when he did take on Shavkat Rakhmonov, because you can't deny that he was landing massive shots on Shavkat Rakhmonov in that matchup, and Shavkat Rakhmonov ended up finishing him late in the fight. But Geoff Neal made Shavkat look very, very human, and we hadn't really seen anyone do that to Shavkat until Geoff Neal was able to do it. And he did lose a close fight to Ian Gary, and it seems like split decisions are Ian Gary's new thing. Raffael dos Anjos is an interesting one, because he was going to be fighting at 170, but then he still went back down to 155 pounds after announcing that he was going to be at 170 pounds. In hindsight now, though, his win over Renato Moicano has aged very, very well, but at the end of the day, that fight was 2.5 years ago, and Renato Moicano did take that fight on very short notice. But since then, he lost to Mateusz Gamrot, was out-wrestled by Mateusz Gamrot, and before that, he fought at 170 against Luque, and lost to Luque, who was coming off the brain injury. So I just feel like it's just a little bit... Maybe RDA has really finally let the age catch up to him, and it's so sad to see, because I do like Raffael dos Anjos. I do remember... it was a beating, unfortunately, but I do kind of remember really becoming a fan of him and Tony Ferguson when they fought against each other, and I believe it must have been like 2017, 2016, maybe more recent than that, but anyway, that's not the point. It's going to come down to, can Raffael dos Anjos get the takedowns against Geoff Neal? And I just don't think he can, because I think that we have seen Geoff Neal defend takedowns against guys like Shavkat Rakhmonov. We've seen Geoff Neal give problems to a lot of people on the feet, including the rangy striker Ian Gary. Rafael dos Anjos is coming back up to 170 pounds after moving down to 155 pounds not that long ago against Gamrot, against a guy that isn't the biggest welterweight in the world, but is a very powerful welterweight and is going to be a pretty sizable guy like Geoff Neal. I think that Geoff Neal still got a little bit in the tank, even though he has lost a couple of fights recently. I do think that Geoff Neal's the better striker. He's definitely the better boxer. And I think as long as the fight is on the feet, Geoff Neal is going to give Rafael dos Anjos a lot of trouble. And we might see Geoff Neal land that knockout blow against Rafael dos Anjos. And unfortunately, I am going to pick Geoff Neal to win by knockout in this matchup. I do think he can finish RDA on the feet. I think RDA needs to get the wrestling going, but I just can't see him getting it done now that he is going to be 40 years old at this fight time. Nurmagomedov gets another pretty favourable matchup against Armen Petrosyan, but I feel like this might start to become the time where people start to fade Nurmagomedov, because so far Nurmagomedov hasn't had the smoothest UFC run. I know that a lot of people are very high on him. He's got a lot of fans, a lot of people like him, but at the end of the day, he did come into the UFC with a lot of hype. He knocked out a bantamweight in Kushel Vyas, if you guys didn't know that. Kushel Vyas was a bantamweight. I know he knocked him out in 7 seconds, but it is what it is. Took on Bruno Silva. Wasn't really the most impressive performance because Bruno Silva, of all people, was getting takedowns against him. And then he took on Tricoli, and that was kind of an odd fight because Tricoli took it on short notice. And I guess Tricoli's new sparring partner is Mackenzie Dern's ex-husband. Look into that. Tricoli might not be on the UFC roster for very long. Like he seems like not a very friendly bloke. And then he does go out there against Mikhail Orchachik and does beat up Mikhail Orchachik. But I do worry just a little bit about Nurmagomedov because I know he's got that kickboxing background. And I know a lot of people are very high on him. And I know at one point he was 17-0. But it turns out the Nashidalo fights aren't really MMA fights because if you get takedowns, there's only a time limit when the fight's on the ground. So it's not really MMA. But really, this guy could be like 19-0 if you were to include the Nashidalo fights. But Nurmagomedov against against Tricoli, it was just a really odd performance because he was only really throwing one strike at a time. He wasn't really throwing any combinations at all. And if you do watch him, he doesn't really have the best head movement either. I know he's got one eye, so maybe that could be it. Maybe you just can't really see strikes coming, but I don't feel that great about picking him in this fight. Now, I am going to pick him against Armen Petrosyan here, but you got to admit, this is a very, very tough stylistic matchup for him because Armen Petrosyan is a striker. And Armen Petrosyan is probably just like strike for strike, one of actually the best pure strikers in the middleweight weight class. And I know that might sound crazy to say. Petrosyan does have legitimately good kickboxing skill set. He did lose to Rodolfo Vieira, but Vieira is a grappler, and he did lose to Caio Borrelho, but Borrelho took him down like 6 times in that fight. Every other time that Petrosyan's fought someone that's going to strike against him, he's won. He absolutely destroyed AJ Dobson's legs in that fight, annihilated AJ Dobson's legs with leg kicks, and against Christian Leroy Duncan, let's be honest, kind of exposed Christian Leroy Duncan for not having really any kickboxing fundamentals whatsoever. So in this fight, you've now got Armen Petrosyan, who's going to be slightly taller than Nurmagomedov here, and has very, very nice kicks of his own right. Doesn't really throw in combinations, to be fair. But in this one, I do think that Nurmagomedov can still get it done because he's going to be the one moving forwards. Armen Petrosyan can be backed up. He can be pressured backwards. And I do think that Nurmagomedov's going to be the one applying the pressure, the one moving forwards here. I don't think there's going to be takedowns on either side. I'd be very, very surprised if we were to see that. So in a pure striking fight, although I do think eventually we're probably going to get to the point where someone is going to defeat Nurmagomedov before he makes it really high up into the rankings, I don't think it's going to be here. I do think that Nurmagomedov can get by Armen Petrosyan, but it's going to be a very close decision here, and I don't have that much confidence. I know a lot of people probably will have confidence in Nurmagomedov. A lot of people are picking him here on the Tapology vote, but I do like Nurmagomedov to defeat Armen Petrosyan in a very close matchup, and I think it's going to be the pressure that really gets it done. Now we can move up to the featured fight of the night. Magomed Ankalaev is now fighting for his title shot against Alexander Rakic. Kind of crazy to say, but I must be honest, I kind of have been one of those people saying that Ankalaev doesn't just deserve just to be gifted a title shot, because at the end of the day, He is 1-1-1 in his last 3 fights, and I thought he lost to Jan Blachowicz. I will die on that hill. I thought Jan won the first round, the second round, and the third round. But then Ankalaev, of course, went out there against Johnny Walker, landed the illegal knee, wasn't looking that good until that happened. But then he did really smoke Johnny Walker, poor Johnny Walker, with no chin, in the next matchup. Now, the thing about Ankalaev, though, is he probably should have been given the title shot over Khalil Rountree. That was kind of insane matchmaking. But at the end of the day, the way that it's been working out is Alex Pereira has been having to take short notice fights. And Ankalaev has said that he will only fight Alex Pereira in Dubai. So, you know, like, it's kind of on him for saying that he won't fight Alex Pereira in Brazil or in the US. So it is one of those things. I know a lot of people will probably be going on about how Ankalaev should get the title shot. Ankalaev wants the title shot in his home territory. It doesn't work like that. You can defend the title in Dubai if you can beat Ferreira. But this is a fight which I think he does win. Now, Rakic is dangerous. He just is very dangerous. I thought that he had the fight of the night against Yuri Prochazka in UFC 300. But in that fight, he took a lot of damage, and now he's coming back only 6 months later after getting injured against Jan Blachowicz. And I know a lot of people will disagree because someone else on this card got the fight of the night on UFC 300. I thought the fight of the night was Prochazka versus Rakic. That fight had me entertained for the higher percentage of the fight than the Holloway-Gaethje fight. Now, that might sound crazy to you, but the Prochazka-Rakic fight was a war. Rakic was really on the come up at one point. A lot of people did think that Rakic would have been the guy to give the champions, the guys at the top, a lot of problems. But he did have the loss to Oestermeer, but then he come back. He beat Santos, he beat Smith. He then was fighting against Blachowicz, and then he injured his leg, which was just really sad to see. But Rakic on the feet, I think, is going to be the better striker here. I know Ankalaev's striking has been worked on, but you can't forget he was dropped by Thiago Santos in their main event, which was probably the worst main event in UFC history. Probably, and yeah. But I think that Ankalaev can out-wrestle him. This breakdown for this fight's been a mess. I'm talking about a minus 400 favorite here, Ankalaev. I do think he can get the takedowns on Rakic. I think he needs to get the takedowns on Rakic. I don't want to see Ankalaev striking with Rakic because Rakic does have good kicks in his own right. We've seen Ankalaev not really deal with kicks all that well. You know, Johnny Walker, before the illegal knee, was landing good strikes on him from range. Jan Blachowicz absolutely smoked his legs. He could barely walk in the 4th round. So I think Rakic could give him trouble on the feet, but I think Ankalaev is just a more well-rounded fighter, and he should wrestle here. I think he kind of needs to against Rakic, but I mean, I could be proven wrong. We have seen Rakic finish twice now, although it was by injury. Yeah. Let's move up to the co-main event. Robert Whittaker now fights against Khamzat Chimaev. I'm going to pick Robert Whittaker here, and I have quite a lot of reasons for this. To start with, this isn't a 3-round fight. This is a 5-round fight. And I think the fact that it's a 5-round fight makes a huge difference. A massive difference. Now, I guess you could say, oh, I'm going to pick Khamzat Chimaev because I think he's going to finish the fight in the 1st round. That's fine. That's all good by you. But I think that the fight actually is going to last longer than 1 round. And another thing as well that I do worry very heavily about Khamzat Chimaev, and I do think that you need to at least consider this before placing bets on Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev was meant to fight against Robert Whittaker in June. And that is, what is that, like 4 months ago now. And Chimaev had to pull out of this fight because he was ill. And the images that we saw from this fight were very concerning. Khamzat Chimaev was in hospital. He was in bed in hospital. It looked like he had a lot of tubes. Kind of, you know, like maybe he was getting drip fed through his nose. Or some sort of, like, they were taking blood test. Or whatever was happening to Khamzat Chimaev. It looked very serious. And you could see that, I believe it was Guram Katatalizzi, his friend and one of his training partners, was kind of sitting in the chair. He was on his phone, but like he had his head down. He kind of looked like he was pretty concerned. We saw a pretty serious image of Chimaev being ill 4 months ago. And now he's going to be coming back against Robert Whittaker. This fight was announced quite a few weeks ago now. So he only really would have had a few weeks to recover from whatever illness it was that really put him out of that original fight against Robert Whittaker. And the Robert Whittaker that we did see take on the replacement Ikram Aliskerov, it was probably one of the better performances we have seen from Robert Whittaker. Now, I did say this at the time, and I will say it again, and it might sound a little bit crazy. I do kind of wish that the fight went for a little bit longer because I would have really liked to see Robert Whittaker deal with a similar stylistic matchup in Aliskerov for 3 rounds. Like, I would have liked to see Whittaker have to defend at least 3 or 4 takedowns. I would have liked to see what happens if Whittaker gets taken down by Aliskerov, because we did see Whittaker kind of struggle a little bit in, I guess a similar stylistic matchup in Dricus du Plessis. So I would have liked to see that. I would have liked to kind of be able to look to compare the 2 fights to each other, but I can't because Robert Whittaker knocked out Aliskerov in 2 minutes. He destroyed him. In this fight, though, Khamzat Chimaev, the last time we saw Khamzat Chimaev fight was against the short-notice Kamaru Usman, and there is kind of an argument that Usman could have won the 2nd and the 3rd round. One thing that's for sure, though, is that Chimaev didn't look as dominant as we had seen before, and we did see Khamzat Chimaev slow down and gas out, and once that first round was over, he didn't really have the same sort of level of explosiveness that he did have in the first round. So the cardio is a concern in general, and now he's been ill 4 months ago, in hospital ill 4 months ago, and now he's coming back against Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker's going to be the fresher guy in there. He wasn't sick 4 months ago. He had one of the best performances of his career 4 months ago. And I think that in this fight, Chimaev needs to get the takedowns early, which maybe he could, because we've seen it happen before. We had never seen anyone out-wrestle Usman like he did in the first round. I will admit that. I'll put my hand up and say that. Against Kevin Holland, he smoked Kevin Holland, is what it is, short notice. Gilbert Burns did give him some trouble, but still he won that fight against Burns. Against the Leech, he just picked him up and tossed him and threw on the rounds. These are matchups that happened years ago, though. We haven't seen Chimaev be that active. The last time we saw him was about a year ago against short notice Usman, who come up for 170 pounds. I do like Whittaker here, and it just comes down to, do you think Whittaker survives the first round? Because if you think that Whittaker does survive the first round, I think he can take over. Because even if Whittaker loses the first 2 rounds, or maybe even loses the first 3 rounds, Whittaker's got to have the better cardio than Chimaev. So I think that eventually Whittaker can really take over in this matchup. I don't think that the fight's going 5 rounds. If it was 3 rounds, I would have been like, oh, maybe it goes the distance. It's definitely not going 5 rounds. And I do think that it's either Khamzat Chimaev wins by finish in the first 2 rounds, or Robert Whittaker wins by finish in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round against a gassed out Khamzat Chimaev. And I'm going to go with the latter. I'm going to pick Robert Whittaker to survive the first round against Khamzat Chimaev and end up with a finish late on into the fight. And it seems like that's the popular pick, even though he is a bit of an underdog there. And now we can move up to the main event. This is a tough one, and I know a lot of fans are very split on this one here. Ilia Topuria is a pretty sizable favourite here against Max Holloway, and I guess you could just MMA method and be really lazy and say Ilia Topuria beat Volkanovski, Max Holloway lost to Volkanovski 3 times. It is what it is. The fans are pretty split on it. I understand that. You can't MMA math this fight. You just can't. I should have really kind of led with that. But Ilia Topuria, I think if he wins this fight, he needs to grapple. I don't think that Ilia Topuria wins a striking fight against Max Holloway. And although he knocked out Volkanovski, he wasn't winning a striking fight against Volkanovski until he landed that right hook, or I believe it was a left hook and then a right hook against Volk, which Volk just didn't really see coming, because before that, Volk was looking good. He was showing that he was the better technical striker. He was beating Ilia Topuria on the feet, and Topuria really gets that Volkanovski fight was just charging forward and throwing hooks, and eventually it was one of those blitzes that did land and knock out Alexander Volkanovski. In this fight, though, against Max Holloway, I think that Holloway is the better striker. I think that Holloway is the better boxer. I think that if it was a 5-round kickboxing fight, I would pick Max Holloway to win. But the thing about Ilia Topuria that I've said before, and I'll say it again, you don't see it much, really, that much anymore. Ilia Topuria is a better grappler than he is a striker. And I still believe that. We did see him dominate Josh Emmett on the feet. Josh Emmett's like 45 years old, is what it is. Though he submitted Bryce Mitchell. We saw him defend all those takedowns against Ryan Hall and knock him out. Jai Herbert hurt him on the feet and then he come back. So we know that Ilia Topuria's got a chin and he can make it happen. But in a striking fight, I think that Max Holloway is the better striker. We just saw Max Holloway go up to 155 pounds at UFC 300. Took on Justin Gaethje. I picked Justin Gaethje in that matchup. Hindsight's 2020. We saw him go up against Justin Gaethje. I thought he was going to look undersized. I didn't think that he was going to be able to kind of just deal with the power of Justin Gaethje. Even though we've never seen Holloway knocked out yet, he still absorbed like 2,200 significant strikes in the UFC, which is insane. Holloway looked good against Gaethje. Yes, Gaethje did hurt Holloway in some moments, but for the most part, it really was Max Holloway kind of controlling the pace against a much, well, not really, I guess, in the fight, a bigger opponent, but he was a bigger opponent, and I would say as well, just a more powerful opponent as well is Gaethje than Holloway, because Holloway isn't really known for getting crazy knockouts, although he did slump Gaethje. That was just kind of a big kind of brawl, and he got like the perfect shot towards the end of the fight. It was kind of an awesome moment. I'm sure everybody remembers that. I don't need to explain it to you. And before that, he was at 145. He beat Chan Sung Jung. Chan Sung Jung really went out on a shield and kind of just ran forward and got caught. Kind of tried to, damn. And that's so sad because now all of these other South Korean fighters are fighting like Chan Sung Jung, and they're all getting hurt. So, anyways. Arnold Allen, he beat Arnold Allen, had a lot of moments towards the end of the fight as well. I think that Max Holloway as well has the better cardio. That's one thing that he's been able to weaponize so far in his career. But I do think that in this fight, we can see Max Holloway establish the jab, establish the range. And the thing is, well, about Holloway that I think a lot of people are going to bring up, and I feel like an idiot for not bringing it up earlier, is he does struggle against shorter opponents. Ilia Topuria is 5'7". Volkanovski, I think, is like 5'6", and Volkanovski was able to just beat up Max Holloway on the feet multiple times. I think he won like 13 out of 15 rounds in the Max Holloway fights. So, yeah, I think that maybe Topuria can find success by blitzing forward. He does have a very different striking style to Holloway. He is a lot less technical. I would even say he's less technical than Justin Gaethje. Now, people are going to probably crucify me for that take, but Ilia Topuria, he really is just kind of a brawler on the feet, but he is very good. He's very good in the pocket. He does get out of the way. It's his grappling, though. The grappling is the X factor, because for a long time, I was picking Holloway. I was on Holloway's side, but the more I just kind of think about it, I like Topuria's grappling, man. Another thing as well that Topuria does so well is rip the body with his hooks. He doesn't just heat hunt like a maniac. He'll come forward and he'll rip the body as well. He'll throw kicks to the legs. So will Holloway, but I think Topuria does it better, and I think that in general, Topuria does hit harder. Now, you can't just say, haha, pillow hands Holloway anymore. He did knock out Chan Sung Jung. He did knock out Justin Gaethje. But at the end of the day, I think the danger on the feet is going to come from the Topuria side. I think Topuria is the more powerful striker. I think that Topuria is the more dangerous striker, and on the ground, I think Topuria is the better grappler. Now, yes, Holloway has legendary takedown and grappling defense. No one's really been able to take down Holloway and control him with ease, and I don't really think that Topuria is going to be able to just take down and grapple to Holloway with ease here, but I think what he's going to be able to do is get the takedowns, get the grappling going, and then Holloway has to think about it, and it gives Topuria options to land on the feet because he's got to worry about the takedowns. And I think that even then, when he's worrying about the hands, which Topuria does have good hands, got a lot of power, then it opens up the opportunity for the takedown. Oh, what a mess. I'm picking Topuria. I don't think Topuria knocks out Max Holloway, though. Now, I didn't think that he was really going to knock out Volk. I did pick Volk to win that matchup, but I think a lot of people did. I think that in this fight, though, it's going to come down to the grappling. I think Topuria wins by submission, so no one's really picking that. I think that the difference in the fight is in the grappling. I would like to see Topuria grapple more because I think that's the best part of his game by far, and I'd like to see it. I would really like to see Topuria mix in the grappling, because everyone thinks of Topuria as a striker, as a boxer. I'm telling you guys, I genuinely believe that Topuria is a better grappler than he is a striker, and I'd like to see that grappling get utilized. I just realized I forgot about Lerone Murphy and Dan Ige. I'll take this on in the end. I was too excited to talk about Whittaker Chimaev. I'm picking Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy just had a really good performance against Barboza. The win over Kalibel has aged pretty badly because Kalibel just lost to a debuting guy. Anyways, the win over Barboza is very impressive. We've seen a lot of people struggle with Barboza. And although Dan Ige did fight against Diego Lopez on short notice and he looked pretty good, at the end of the day, Lopez was landing a lot of strikes on him. And I did actually say this in the Diego Lopez breakdown against Ortega, that we saw Dan Ige really exposed Lopez's striking. Yes, he did expose Lopez's striking, I thought, because Lopez was just kind of had his chin up in the air throwing hooks. Ige was still getting caught by a lot of those hooks. and I think that Leroy Murphy's the more technical striker in the fight. I think he can land more. Yeah, I'm just gonna go with Leroy Murphy to win by decision in the fight. I do apologize for missing out on that. I was too excited to talk about Whittaker versus Chimaev. It is what it is. I'll see you guys in the next one.